Hello, we're going to be joining a group of researchers from KTH, Royal Institute of Technology, and other affiliated institutions who have been working for the last 4 years on a fascinating project, a database of research on public space. Why is public space important, or indeed is it important? What are the issues that we are understanding about public space, how it works, how it sometimes doesn't work, how it needs to be managed and perhaps improved, and in some cases created, in some cases protected from damage and from erosion from other uses, and including private uses, privatization, and so on. So I'm pleased to be joined by some of the leading researchers into issues of public space, and they include David Brain, who's a professor of sociology at New College of Florida, Patrick Condon, who's a professor of urban design at the University of British Columbia, Seth Lowe, who's a distinguished professor of anthropology and environmental psychology and director of the Public Space Research Group at the Graduate School of the City University of New York. Shilpa Mehta, who's assistant professor of urban planning and design at the University of Cincinnati, and Vikas Mehta, who's Fruth Gemini Chair and Professor of Urban Design at the University of Cincinnati as well. And finally, but not least, Yodan Rofé, who is now the course director of the Building Beauty program, which is a really interesting, innovative program. He's also senior lecturer of urban planning and design at Ben Gurion University of the Negev. And I'm your moderator, Michael Mahaffey, and I'm senior researcher at the Axon Johnson Foundation, and I am sometimes known as a collaborator over at the Center for the Future of Places. And I've been involved with this database project myself for a number of years. I'd like to also mention Peter Elmland, who is the initiator of the project for Axon Johnson Foundation, Tigran Haas, who is the director of our center, who's been involved in shepherding this project for many years, and Anna Paula Johnson, who unfortunately cannot join us tonight, but who has worked tirelessly to shepherd this project through as the manager for the Axon Johnson Foundation. So quite a great group of people and a fascinating project. And I should note that Patrick and Yodan have been our external reviewers. They've been less directly involved in the project, but they've been very centrally involved in giving us guidance and feedback on the project. So the first thing I want to do is give a little bit of background about the project. As many of you know, the new urban agenda was adopted at Habitat 3, which was the conference in 2016, later adopted by consensus by all 193 countries of the United Nations. So it's a very big deal to have this international framework agreement. And public space looms very large in the document as one of the key features, which was something we worked very hard to accomplish along with our partners at UN Habitat. And there is language, something like 9 paragraphs that talk about the importance of well-connected and well-distributed networks of public space with a number of different characteristics. And there's language also in the Sustainable Development Goals, another document from about the same time, talking about safe, inclusive, accessible, green, and public spaces. And that mirrored language is not by accident. UN Habitat certainly worked hard to get that language into both documents. And some of the benefits that they talk about for public space are things like social interaction and inclusion, human health and well-being, economic exchange, cultural expression, and so on. Quite a few benefits that we're looking at in terms of what the research actually shows. And certainly there are aspirations to achieve these goals in public space in implementing the new urban agenda. But of course, getting the language adopted is one thing, but actually achieving the goals is another. So some of the questions that we should think about and we'll talk about today is, what is the structure of public space? How do we understand it? Why does that matter? What are the benefits? What is the evidence of this that is persuasive to a mayor or to a company or to a stakeholder group who needs to understand why this should be done? How does public space function? How does it fail or succeed? And how can we create and or manage public space and maintain public space? And especially, and this is a key question for today, how do we gather and share this knowledge? And especially at a moment in history when public space is in alarming decline around the world. And we need to ask, well, how important is that? Does that matter? Well, in fact, the research shows that it does indeed matter, but we need to gather up that research and analyze it, distill it, make it available for practitioners, available for mayors and NGOs and businesses, people that are actually implementing the new urban agenda. And that's what we've been working on at the Center for the Future of Places, how to translate the research into practice in order to implement the new urban agenda. The center is an evolution of an earlier project, the Future of Places Partnership, which is a 4-year forum that's been working with UN Habitat and other partners to feed language into the new urban agenda, bringing together over 1,500 researchers, professionals, government leaders, and activists from 275 organizations and 100 countries. So quite a large gathering of people. And of course, getting the new urban agenda adopted with the language on public space was an important accomplishment. Again, adopted by acclamation by all 193 countries of the United Nations. But again, we need to translate those aspirations into practice. We need to translate research into practice. So that's what the database is all about. So just a brief overview of the features of the database before we begin the discussion. So the research database is known as TerraPublica, and the goal is to bring together research literature from many different fields and to curate that research specifically on the topic of public space and to be able to draw conclusions about the findings and where maybe the gaps are and where additional research is needed. But also what we know already from the different disciplines and the different topics and how we can bring those together and take those lessons to practitioners to actually implement these goals. By the way, thanks to Vikas Mehta for these slides. So the research is drawn from all around the world, although it is concentrated in the United States and Europe, partly because it's limited to English language research for the most part. And what we've done is taken the research and categorized it according to a number of different organizing categories and a number of different key concepts. And then we've been able to see the relationships between those different categories and how the research is filling out the picture, how some of the topics are very well covered and others are not covered as well. And the database also allows users to come in and explore these different key concepts and look at some of the research and what the conclusions are. And we're also able to map the relationships between the different topics and how they're actually interacting with each other through the literature, how the relationships are formed between the topics, which is quite interesting and we think revealing. And we've been able to see how public space research has changed over time over the last 40 years or so as different topics have come to emerge and dominate as the research has been developed further. And we're able to map the different topics and how they're related to one another and how they're beginning to form more important relationships that might be emerging from the literature as well. And here are some of the journals that we've used to do the surveys in many different disciplines. They're leading journals. We're looking at the leading peer-reviewed research, the most cited research on public space, so that we have good quality results. Okay, so that's a good backgrounder for the discussion. Yodan, I'll start with you on the database project, why you think it's important, what you think maybe it's accomplished, and where we go from here.
I think as we can see from the nature of the database, public space is an issue that crosses many disciplines, not only urban planning and design, but also public health, psychology, sociology, economics, and it's an embodiment of a concept which is central to, I think, to politics and to communication, which is the public realm. And so it's central, I think, to almost all the discussions that are global discussions at this particular moment of crisis. So I think in some sense, public space, it brings down, because of the physicality of it, it brings down all the issues that we're grappling with in society. It brings them down to a practical and sensible reality. And I think by grappling with that reality, in which you can do in very great detail and which touches everyone, you can also form principles that can serve you also in the more theoretical and the more abstract aspects of the public realm. So I think that's the importance of the issue, and bringing the strongest literature on public space into one place where scholars, students, practitioners, and lay people can find information quickly. I think that's a commendable project, almost impossible project to do, but definitely a commendable project. In terms of where would one take it, I would say the instinct often is to try to form some sort of summary, definitive statement, and I'm not sure that this instinct is the correct one. I think this is an issue that needs debate. What to do with the database? And that's an issue that needs some debate and maybe some thinking from people who have not been so involved with making it. But if it's well done, it'll get used, and in ways that we cannot foresee, and that will be a benefit in itself.
Patrick, I'll jump back to you and ask you, speaking as a reviewer, what are the lessons that you see emerging from the research and from our project, and what do you see as the next steps?
Well, I think I'll answer that question, Michael, by backing up to one of my fears when you all started this project. And my fear was that it was in competition with a Google search where you just put in public space and you get thousands and thousands of references. And now I'm quite pleased to see how wrong I was, because it's very, very crucial to have a curated, which is what you've done, is curate this broad information and elevate those things that are fundamental, and the supportive theories and practical applications that explain the importance of public space is in a form now that's digestible. That there's a lot of information, but there's a limited amount of information, which if you're take, for example, if you're a student interested in public space for the first time, you will be exposed in a productive way to a lot of information that will, instead of confusing you, open up all the different issues that public space relates to. Yeah. One more thing I wanted to add, that you can go from the issues, sociological, political, and economic, into the reality of three-dimensional public space in situ, and for all of its qualitative and embedded meanings. To that, I might add that you can also use the idea of public space as the window into those issues. Whether the issues are public space as an embodiment and demonstration of what's happening with capital, the movement of the financial world in and through public space, and how that manifests itself both to our benefit and to our detriment sometimes. Related issues, space and inequality, who has access to that space and who does not have access, and how is that exclusion and inclusion engineered through how spaces are constructed and the symbols that spaces often include, which are not altogether obvious until you have developed a keener eye for understanding that, which is, I think, very beneficial to not just designers, but to a broader audience. And then lastly, yes, we did have this discussion about the idea of writing a manifesto. It may be useful to have, as an introduction to this large body of work, what those of you who have, or those of us, or those of you, whoever participates in this creation, have understood as what ends up being the fundamental principles. We declare these truths to be self-evident, that all space is created for people, or whatever, however you want to articulate that. But if that's too highfalutin, maybe it's just a summary description. Maybe it's a precise, of what the fundamental stuff is going to be that you'll find in here, and how you all hope it would be useful. And Peter, I hope you're going to be able to continue to support this over time, because I think it's going to need some care and feeding, because the issues that pertain to public space change not just yearly, but probably monthly, as the COVID experience has already shown us, for both better and worse. So congratulations, and please continue.
David, can I turn to you briefly? What do you see as the major lessons coming out of this research and out of the database project?
Well, as a social scientist who with a background and an interest in architecture, if you imagine the social sciences and the design professions each having a Facebook page, they would both describe their relationship as complicated. It's a very difficult relationship. The design-oriented research draws on the social sciences. The social sciences haven't been too keen on addressing issues that are relevant and interesting to the design side. So I think from my point of view, what has been most interesting and exciting about this has been to have this opportunity all in one place, and also working with colleagues from different disciplines to see how a lot of the themes and issues are framed and investigated from different disciplinary standpoints. And I'm hopeful that what this kind of resource can do is really help us develop some genuinely transdisciplinary research agendas.
Setha, you've been working in public space research for quite a long time, and are really noted for your research on public space and the challenges of public space and the importance of public space. You're working on a book on that right now, right?
Right. I'm writing a book funded by the KTH, and I want to thank Tigran Haas and Peter Emblem for your continuing support of me. Yes, it's taken a long time, but it's going to be an important book coming out with Oxford Press next year. And I think the title, according to one of my editors, might have changed to "Does Public Space Matter?" And that each chapter will in fact answer the question of does it matter by demonstrating how it does matter, and how if you don't have public space, it would have an impact. So I think that will also help our cause. I'm very excited that the database is now out and public, and we can use it, and it will be hosted by different universities, which I think will bring different groups of students to it. I think it, will get talked about and discussed in classes in a different way than it hasn't been when it was just in one place that seems sometimes pretty far away. I think that's very exciting. I do think we're still facing the updating issue, but at the same time, what we can also consider this is a real summary at this moment in time. And what I'm hoping is how I've used the database is for each chapter. So I was just talking about this chapter on ecological sustainability, but on sustainability, I could search through the database and go through all the articles and pick the ones that I really wanted to highlight. And I didn't use them all, Patrick. It's just what you said. They weren't all equally relevant to what I was trying to say, but it gave me a way to go in, select some really key articles, and then of course you can even use those key articles and follow back out. That's something we're not talking about, right? But once I got an article that had just the right kind of twist that I was trying to write about, trying to deal with the contradictions involved in sustainability, our bibliography, the database opens you up to finding all other things that are referenced and included. So let's not forget that it works as a network in many ways, both through the people who are going to use it, through the articles themselves, to how we're all using it in different ways, for me, this book, and certainly for my students, but also then it's still a reservoir of other people and other references that lead us out farther, which I'm excited about. I guess I think the biggest challenge, Michael, you're not asking me, will be what do we do about updating it? And I think now it's on us to try to figure out how we're going to handle that. And maybe Vikas or Tigran have some ideas about that. That I still, I still think we have to think about, but I'm very happy that we have gotten this far with all the support from Axel Johnson Foundation and from KTH's Center for the Future of Places. Without your financial and I would argue emotional support, we wouldn't have come this far. And I think we have something to be very proud of.
Here. So Vikas and Shilpa, you've been working together, husband and wife team at the University of Cincinnati. And I know we were talking a little bit earlier, Vikas, about your work on streets as public space. And this ties into something else we were talking about, that public space is this sort of ultimate connective matrix for the city that gives people connections to all the other parts of the city, to the resources, to the opportunities, to the other people that they interact with, especially important during a crisis, as Eric Kleinenberg's research showed, that they need those sidewalks and those streets in order to connect and to stay healthy, stay well in a city. So Vikas and Shilpa, what is your major finding? What did you learn from this database project, especially relating to streets?
So I think I want to maybe connect a few things a little bit different from what David's perspective was, which was a little more pessimistic than mine, and also connecting to what Patrick was talking about in terms of a manifesto. Not necessarily a manifesto like perhaps a new urbanist manifesto, but something that's coming out of what we've seen. So one of the first things which we, I don't know if you remember, showed in the slide is the exponential increase of research in public space. Mm-hmm. From the 1960s to the last year, which is 2018, that we looked at it. Even from 2000 to 2018, in about 18, 19 years, the number of articles is more than 3 times. That says something. And knowing that we are not only looking at one discipline, that's actually even more promising. That across these disciplines, the research on public space is just growing, exponentially. The other thing that's actually perhaps, again, little concerning for me is when we looked at these different key concepts and organizing categories to see what is the relationship of public space to what topics. And again, to pick up on what Patrick was saying, public space is a window into the city. If you look carefully, at least it is a partial window into the city. And what we found in the database is that there is, in fact, very little research relative to all of the 500 articles that we looked at on public space and environment, the ecology that Seda was talking about. Perhaps we haven't looked everywhere, and we should certainly always keep that in mind, but there is not the kind of interest that, for example, is in social interaction in public space or social relations in public space. So that's actually a very, very interesting finding, that there isn't that much there, which means there is the opportunity, especially in these times, to connect public space to something that is eventually going to become pretty important in policy. Yeah. So what can public space do when we address issues of climate change? Yeah. I think that's the dialogue. And I think there is some optimism there. The other aspect of it is we did not find very much around public space and care, or care for public space. And we did not find very much around public health and public space.
Yeah.
I know there are several journals in public health that, you know, will publish things around public space. Perhaps we should look carefully. But here are those two same topics that how does in a time of crisis like this, are we using public space to our advantage? And perhaps there is the opportunity. So it's almost attaching or using public space to attach to public health and to ecology, which is, I think, a great opportunity moving forward. Lastly, I think in the database that will, you know, live with the universities that we are part of, it is a living, breathing thing. It is not ended. We are going to be putting a doctoral student who will continue to follow up and perhaps look at some of these areas that are that we were not able to find that much work in. And I think it's about the network, that how do we open it up to students who open it up to others as they move in their careers as well, and keep this thing going for essentially as a resource for everyone.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you know, one of the things that we talked about early on as a goal of this project was to do just what you were saying, to look at where those gaps are, those you know, lacunae in the research that maybe could be addressed through subsequent research. Maybe you're going to carry it out, Satha, others who are part of our group, or others elsewhere, because it's been identified and it's now seen as a need, and maybe there's a mayor or there's a policy group or an agency that wants to see that happen. And so that's another key goal, certainly, of the project. Shilpa, do you have anything to add to Vika's comments?
Yeah, sure, I did. To address your question about the husband-wife team, that's another conversation over a beer someday, Michael. But the most interesting thing to me has been, now that we have a well-curated set of articles, we have a very unique framework that we've created using organizing categories and key concepts. Now, to me, the issue is how do we start to draw between the lines here, start to see where these things are all interconnecting. And some of the visualizations that you've been saying are an attempt to go in that direction, to start to see, if we talk a lot about place and identity, for example, what specific identities are we talking about? And we find articles related to age, we find articles related to gender, we find articles related to disabilities or abilities, income, class, race. So it's almost like there are bubbles within these bubbles, and we need to figure out how they all connect to each other and talk to each other. So we've set something in motion here that is capable of a lot of intelligence. Now it's for us to draw that intelligence out of it, and using the analytical tools that are at the mercy of all our universities here. So I think it's an exciting phase for this project at this time.
Sounds very exciting indeed. And one of the things I was struck by is, I think it was Yodan who was talking about how public space becomes this sort of concrete place where all of these silos of different specialties come together in one real thing. And we certainly have intended that the database would be that as well, that we would bridge the silos and bring a lot of this research together and learn a lot more about public space, and also about what we don't know and what we need to know further. So this is very much an ongoing project, and it's been terrific getting to this point with you all. And I look forward to where it goes from here. So thank you all.
Bye, everybody. Great to see you.
Bye, everybody.
I miss you. I miss you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.